Okay, for our final session before lunch, I do want to just mention there will be a short video as well as discussion about suicide. So if that's something you'd rather not be in the room for, this would be a good time. Or if you're watching online, perhaps take a break. But we are going to begin with the trailer of a remarkable new documentary called Molly versus the Machines. Could we see that first?
If it can happen to our family, then it could happen to anybody.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Molly. While her parents captured memories, I captured metadata. As she was drawn deeper into darkness, I grew stronger.
I have no doubt that Instagram helped kill my daughter.
The inquest has opened into the death of a teenage girl who took her own life after being exposed to harmful content online.
This looks like control. It looks like trying to take control of the person who is suffering.
You see everyone in their phones. It's just like zombies walking around. No one's actually connected to the real world.
It separated her from the offline world, dragged her into this machine world, leading her towards her death.
You're not their parent. You're just a business in America.
We're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more.
No, we're pushing to regulate companies to make them safe. Battle lines drawn now, very clearly.
How many Mollys does it have to take for them to actually realise that this is wrong? When will they make the change?
Please welcome Ian Russell. Ian, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for asking.
Really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, Ian is Molly Russell's father, chair of the Molly Rose Foundation. He's also one of the foremost tech accountability campaigners in the UK. I also did a bit of research on him. He's been a BBC producer for many, many years, including Night at Sky, right? The Sky at Night,
yeah.
even, which for any Brits in the room will know is pretty foundational television watching. Why don't we just start? Could you tell us about Molly?
I think you're asking the wrong person because I'm biased as her dad. But I probably would say this. Molly was one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. I'm lucky. She was the youngest of three daughters, and all of them are truly amazing, said the biased dad. But one of the things I like about that film is that it includes 5 of Molly's friends. And the most powerful testament that they give is the way they remember their friend. They remember their 14-year-old friend. Molly was only 14 when she ended her life. And the way in which they do that chimes with the way I do that as a bereaved parent and the way the other family members do. And we remember a young person who had so much to offer. I don't know anyone that didn't know Molly that wasn't completely engaged with her. She was enigmatic. She was thoughtful. She didn't like being the centre of attention. So I'm not quite sure what she would make of this. But she would, if it ever came to it, she would weigh up what was going on. And if she felt something was amiss, she wouldn't hesitate to put up her hand and say, "Stop it, that's not right. You need to do something different." And that's that courageous, caring side of Molly is the thing I think I remember most about her.
Tell us more about, because and I was able to watch the documentary in the U.S. for various reasons, but it's not available yet, unfortunately. But what would her friends say about her? In the sense of, obviously they would know her in a different way than her dad would.
Yeah. And it's great to see, they're now in their early 20s, and it's great to see them remembering how you change as a young person between being 14 and being in your early 20s is a huge change, huge part of growing up. And they remember that caring person. They remember she was the first to offer help. They remember the WhatsApp messages of support that would come from Molly. And they remember the cheeky side of her, the sense of humour that she had, and the way that she would perhaps diffuse tense situations with that. And they remember a person who, what happened? The phrase "what happened to Molly" comes out quite often. They remember a person who they say, "What happened to Molly didn't need to happen. It was so preventable." And of course, they just wish she was still here with us and fulfilling all that potential and promise that a young person always does have.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things, and it was shown in the trailer briefly, one of the things I found very striking about the documentary was that the coroner's inquest into Molly's death was reenacted with actors, I believe, using the actual testimony in the inquest. So talk about that inquest. Talk about, because it was several years after her death, and what were the obstacles leading up to that? And in a way, did you get what you wanted to get out of that inquest?
I don't think you can ever get what you need as someone bereaved of a close family member from a process like an inquest. But we found, there was no obvious sign of any mental ill health with Molly, I should say that. So as well as the pain and the grief of losing a 14-year-old family member, we had questions that all began with a why. Why did this happen? How could this happen? And we quickly discovered on Molly's social media accounts there was content that we thought just wouldn't be available on a global, responsible platform. And amongst the pop stars and celebrities followed by 14-year-olds, there were two main streams of shocking content. One was immediately horrifying and was quite often, I'll say no more than to say it was quite often bright red in colour, connected with graphic self-harm. And the other, which was wasn't as shocking immediately, was probably more long-term distressing for those of us that have seen it, which was quite often black and white. Quite often there were drawings as if they were pencil drawings, and text-based quotes that supported a sense of hopelessness, worthlessness, and eventually this stream of algorithmically recommended content that Molly was incessantly exposed to was, I think, what persuaded her that she should end her life because, unbelievably, for those who knew her, she was a burden. So when we'd seen that content, it just felt that if I was unaware as a parent that the level of this content was so readily available to someone who was 14, there'd be other parents who would be unaware as well. And then their parenting decisions would be affected. And you can't make the right parenting decisions if you don't know the facts. So it felt really important to do everything we possibly could to raise awareness. And the first step was to engage with the formal process in the UK when a death such as Molly's is investigated by the coroner, to engage with that coronial process. And I think we were lucky. We had a very understanding coroner who wanted to find out why Molly had died almost as much as we did as a family. And I gather that's not always the case because coroners are busy. But Senior Coroner Andrew Walker dug in with us to try and find out what he could. In the end, that coronial process, which is supposed to be completed within a year, took nearly 5 years to complete. He asked 5 services to supply information, digital services, about what they knew about Molly and her digital accounts. 3 of them didn't particularly respond. WhatsApp said they deleted all the information about her account, was only able to supply very, very basic account information. X eventually let me log in and take over Molly's account, which was very nerve-wracking and strange, but didn't give us any of the background into what happened there. Snapchat said, we're a US company, pursue us in the States, so that went nowhere. And in the end, it was Meta, because Molly had an Instagram account, and Pinterest, who both contributed to the coroner's investigation and ended up sending witnesses to the inquest, which lasted for 9 days.
Yeah, so in the documentary, it's very clear the Meta / Instagram lawyer was there. It took me going back into the archives to find that Pinterest was also there. Could you compare and contrast the approaches of those 2 companies at the inquest?
I think, using a word like lucky is an odd thing to use on a story like this, but I think we were very fortunate to have 2 platforms with very different approaches there. They both served up harmful content to Molly. Pinterest immediately admitted that that's what they had done and had already started to take steps to do something about it. They were still not perfect, certainly at the time of the inquest, but they were sorry and they contributed data. They had a team of, I think, 17 people working for days to find out everything they possibly could from Molly's accounts to supply the sort of details that social media companies do know. Not only do they know what you see and what you've saved and liked and engage with, they know if you slow down in your scrolling and you hover slightly over a post. They know that. That sometimes informs the algorithms to suggest certain other types of content, similar types of content, to engage you, because those algorithms are, of course, engagement-based, or they certainly were in 2016. By contrast, Meta used the techniques that I think they've become famous for. They delayed when they could. It took them a very long time to supply evidence. They supplied evidence in a way when it first arrived that was very unuser-friendly for our legal team. It wasn't even possible to search the database they sent through. And we pushed and we pushed and we pushed. And I reckon they added at least 2 years to that inquest process. And our legal team, who compare what Pinterest submitted and what Meta submitted, estimate that Meta's submissions are about 5 to 10% of what they could have submitted if they'd wanted to. They only ever sent the material that Molly had engaged with. So if she'd shared it or saved it or liked it, that's what we based the figures on. But from that evidence, we know that Molly saw at least 2,100 images that were harmful in their own right in the last 6 months of her life, because that was the period for which the coroner requested the data.
Yeah. Some of you who were with us 2 years ago in Paris remember my conversation with Arturo Bejar, the Facebook whistleblower. And as I was watching the documentary, I was thinking, gosh, I hope Arturo's watching this. And then he's in it. So talk about his involvement in the documentary and what he brought to the film.
Arturo seems... he's an amazing person, isn't he? First of all. And so wedded to making the online world safer. And he seems particularly connected to Molly and her story. So we have regular conversations with him. And I think there's a parallel there, because you'll no doubt remember, Stephen, that he headed up the sort of trust and well-being side of Meta and left in 2015, I think, if I've got the dates right. And it was all in a good place. And then his daughter experienced some bad experiences online on Instagram, and he tried to do something about it. There was no easy way to report it, which there should be an easy way to report that content. So he decided to go back and as a contractor work for them again. And all the safety systems that had been in place and were in good health seemed to have been disbanded when Archero went back in 2019. And most poignantly, I remember him telling me the Compassions team, which he was a part of, had developed technologies, AIs, that could detect what might be suicidal browsing patterns. And they were getting better and better at doing it. And soon after he left, a colleague of his who was in charge of that team left, and she was presented with a glass jar full of glass marbles, hundreds of marbles, and every one of those marbles was a life that they knew they'd intervened and possibly saved through those technologies. And if only Molly had a marble in there instead. But when he went back in 2019, that team had been disbanded or distributed amongst the organisation, and he found all the systems that had been put in place and were growing and developing in disarray and ineffective, which is quite horrifying.
Yeah. And he has gone to Capitol Hill and he has testified and he's worked with state AGs in the States and so on this. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit, because what has come out of this tragedy is you have established the Molly Rose, and Molly Rose was her middle name, correct?
Just a middle name, yeah.
That's sweet. The Molly Rose Foundation, what, in 2018?
Yeah, within a year of her death.
Wow. Okay. Talk about its mission. What is it that you're doing at the foundation?
So it's a very simple mission, which is to connect young people who might need help and support to those sources of support that are readily available. We very quickly realised that there were helplines and hope lines and many NGOs who supplied amazing services. There was no need to add to that list. But better signposting was one of the things we wanted to do, so that if young people found a problem or encountered a problem, that they had somewhere to turn to. So we have that's embedded on our website, and very early on we sent out where to find help cards to schools and child-facing organisations in the UK. So a shortened list of 5 child prioritising helplines, so that you can carry them around in a purse, a pocket or a wallet. And if you or you find a friend is in crisis, it's a place that you can find immediate support from. We stayed quite, I don't know, not quite dormant, but we prioritised the process, the coronial process. We prioritised the inquest, and as that took so long, we stayed quite quiet for a while. And then since then, we have grown as an organisation, and we work more with government, with regulators in the UK, in terms of forming effective policy, which is the hot topic of the moment, of course. And we're expanding operations in terms of education, so that we can go into schools and do direct education. There are opportunities to do that within the UK. But more widely, that sort of gentle digital literacy that the young people particularly talked about. Regulation and policy is one thing, and it's vital, because the era of self-regulation amongst tech hasn't delivered enough results. So regulation and policy is needed to compel the companies to change. But without that understanding and better, wider digital literacy, I don't know why I've got this metaphor. I will say it's like trying to squeeze toothpaste with one finger. You need both a finger and a thumb to get the toothpaste out of the tube. And education and regulation are those 2 digits that help you do that.
Yeah, something Thomas just said a few moments ago. Well, all right, let's stay with legislation. You are obviously a big proponent of the Online Safety Act. You've been sometimes critic, I think, of Ofcom and its implementation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have been somewhat critical. Everyone's talking about the Australian social media ban. Where do you guys come out on that?
Well, I think the majority of people, certainly the majority of people I've heard from so far in this room, and for that matter, I was in Strasbourg last week at a Council of Europe event where these issues were debated as well. And in fact, it was I didn't hear one dissenting voice in that day-long discussion there. is that bans might seem to provide a solution. Underage, under 16-year-old bans, under 15-year-old bans, we're even debating what age it should be. They might seem to provide a solution, but they're so far from perfect. And they're penalising the wrong people. We shouldn't be penalising young people who are growing up in a digital world and should be allowed to grow up and experience all the benefits of digital technology. We should be stopping the source of harm at source. And that's dealing with the platforms, dealing with anything that might exacerbate the situation. So algorithmic recommendation of harm, in a way, is what I think led to Molly's death. Had she not had this constant feed of harm, telling her she was worthless, telling her she was useless, telling her there was no hope, it would have been a lot easier for her to ignore it or to decide to come for help. But she was coached into methods of hiding it and dissuaded from somehow finding the courage to come to me as a parent or someone else and say, look, I've got a problem. I'm thinking of ending my own life. And a ban would only make that worse as well. And if you're making that worse, then that's a danger. And I know you're going to talk about Australian figures later, but one of the other things Molly Rose Foundation do is where there's a gap in evidence is we try where we can to commission research or do polling that helps us understand where we are. And we've done some Australian polling, and one of the things that strikes me there is 14% of 13 to 15-year-olds in Australia feel that the ban there has made their life worse or more unsafe. So it's been detrimental. It's not a huge percentage, but it's a significant percentage that it hasn't helped. And we know that there are better things where you can reach beyond the ban and you can deal directly with the addictive natures of algorithms, or you could deal with the features of tech that can keep anyone, doesn't matter how old you are, but keep you on a platform, those engagement-based features like infinite scroll or autoplay. And of course, if you are a young person, there's no way that an adult should be able to find a way to contact you using.
But didn't you also find there was like
platform.
61% of kids have got around the ban? Is that right?
In Australia, I mean, it's very early days. That we all know that it's just over 6 months, but at the moment, 61% by our polling weren't affected at all by the ban. So it's not enough. It's not proving to be effective in the way that it was promised. And there are signs of pivoting there when it used to be said that would provide the safe new digital future that Australia was after. But they're now talking about years, if not generations, before it might have a beneficial effect. Well, we can't wait years or generations, because the other thing that I need to say is, although Molly died 8.5 years ago, some of the research that we've done as an organisation shows that there's nothing significant that's changed. The same sort of content that Molly saw and was algorithmically recommended to her in 2016-17 is still online, still on the major platforms. It's still there. It's not difficult to find. And it's still, most shockingly of all, it's still being recommended by those platforms, algorithms. So there'll be people today who are facing the same sort of pressures and facing the same sort of harmful content that Molly did. So it's interesting to hear the conversations today, but I think you can almost summarise. I don't mean this to be demotivating. I think this should be really motivating. Whatever any of us have done, we're all here to try and improve safety in the digital world. But whatever we've done so far, and I include me, it's not enough. And we need to redouble our efforts and we need to work harder, because I don't believe the solutions are as impossible as sometimes we're led to believe.
Yeah. Last year in Amsterdam, we were kindly hosted by Netflix, and we showed a little section of the Netflix series Adolescence. What did you think of that series? Did you see that series?
Yeah.
What did you think? And are there any parallels with your own documentary or Molly's life, for that matter?
I think there are parallels. It's an extraordinary piece of television filmmaking, whatever you want to call it, and it's affected the whole world. I think it's. I don't think there's a nation that it hasn't been seen in where it hasn't had a profound effect. There are key differences. It's a drama. It's maybe based on what's happening around us, but it's not based on a particular case. So that's a difference with the Molly versus the Machine film. And I think it struggled to suggest solutions to the problem of the toxic manosphere, because that's sort of not the job of a drama, maybe. And I think for those who have seen Molly versus the Machines, again, it's hard. But there's a path forward where we do listen to the voices of young people, and they're included in the film. We do examine the way that particularly Meta works and has excused its behaviours by looking at the inquest and the evidence that was provided by the witness that Meta provided, and we do chart the course of the development of the tech business models. Professor Shoshana Zuboff was involved from Harvard, was involved in the writing of the documentary. So we see the parallel development of those business models and some of the decision making and the staff changes that led to them becoming less about connecting people and community and town squares, and more about pursuing profit initially and power secondarily.
Okay. Now, just remind us, where can folks in the UK, for that matter, see the document Molly right now? On channel? Is it Channel 4? Channel
4, yeah. Public service broadcast Channel 4. So if you go and they've got an on-demand thing. You can see that in the UK. The film company that made it, I'm not connected other than contributing to it. I'm not a producer of the film. They are working very hard as we speak to try and find international distribution deals for the film. Mark Silver, the director of the film, he absolutely deserves a mention because he works so sympathetically to deliver an 80-minute narrative that tries to pack in all the key salient points that tell one story, but that story is representative of, sadly, thousands and thousands of others, and tell the story of how those young people who are affected by harmful tech fit in with the big tech business models and how we need to do better. So hopefully, just check your local press and things, and the distribution deals will be coming. And I think there are some European broadcasters where the Molly versus the Machines documentary will be available on quite soon.
There might even be representatives of Netflix in the room we could talk to. I'd love to see this distributed across North America, Australasia, and so on. It's a very, very important documentary for us all to see. Can we finish? This might be a strange question. I hope it's not a strange question, but what are your hopes for the future? I'll leave it as broadly as that.
I actually have lots of hope. And I think we sit at a point where we'll look back. I hope we'll look back at 2026 and say that was a point of inflection. That was a pivot point. Because not enough has been done so far, but there's been this building up of pressure. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Stephen, the conversations that are happening globally at the moment are happening. I don't think there's a parent on the planet that isn't concerned if they've got young people or a teenager. I don't think they're concerned about what those young people might be seeing online. And it's not acceptable. Where we are now is simply not acceptable because you can't parent properly. You can't trust tech. And so there is understandable outrage, and that has caused debate and discussion. It's motivated governments to invest in something I think hitherto they may have been frightened of, because governments need money, money needs growth, growth so often comes from tech, and all of that is important and shouldn't be ignored. But I think it's probably led governments to be very cautious how they've dealt with this. It's probably led regulators to be very cautious about how they implement the regulations and be too timid in their approach to tech. And so the current conversations that we're seeing in the UK, and I know are echoed in Europe and elsewhere around the world, including the US, with the debates, the reignited debates about COSA, for example. I think it's time for change, and the world has realised. And the other thing that's happening, of course, haven't really been mentioned yet, but there's been two very important cases in the US, one in California and one in New Mexico, briefly mentioned. And I was privileged to be asked by the Attorney General of New Mexico to give evidence to that case. And I know Meta didn't want me to. Wonder why. But it's time we all spoke up. And if our lawmakers and the juries on those cases are finding on the side of people rather than the platforms, and the parents of the world are saying it's time for change, and the politicians of the world are saying we've got to do something, I think we'll look back on 2026 as that pivot point. And the only thing I think is a concern is for politicians, for all of those reasons I've said, it might be the easy option to say something like, we'll do a blanket ban for under 15, 16-year-olds, because that's an easy solution. It looks like I'm doing something. The evidence doesn't support that. So it's time to take real action that will make a real change. And I think the pendulum has swung back in the last months, and even in the last weeks, there's been a growing consensus supporting action to take proper policy decisions that target the harms at source and put the platforms on charge to do something about the harms that they may be spreading.
Wow. Well, my hope is that all of us here can support you in your work, and that you can feed back into our work, how we can push this along so that we can look back to 2026 to see it as an inflection point. But in the meantime, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your intelligence. As a father of 2 daughters and now a granddaughter, it's an extraordinary privilege and honor just even to be here with you. So thank you so much for your work. Ian Russell, people.
Thank you.